touch them. The words of the three fingers. As your maiden, allow me to divine them. All that there is came from the one great. Then came fractures, and births, and souls. For the greater will made a mistake. Torment, despair, affliction, every sin, every curse, every one born of the mistake. And so, what was borrowed must be returned, melted all away with the yellow chaos flame, until all is one again. In Marika's own words, the Earth Tree governs all. The choice is thine. Become one with the Order, or divest thyself of it, to wallow at the fringes, a powerless upstart.
The Flame of Frenzy in Elden Ring is one of the only forces in the world portrayed as being truly demonic or unnatural. Even the Scarlet Rot is not portrayed with the same level of terror or derision as a force of nature within the world. It's so bad that Melina will even turn on you if you pursue the Lord of Frenzy ending, something she doesn't even do if you take the Dung Eater's questline. Hayata and Shabriri, the two NPCs who advocate for the Flame of Frenzy, pose it as something that will basically mercy kill the entire world. In the beginning, there was one great, and from it, everything broke off in a fracture. By burning the world, everything can be returned to cinder and ash, and thus all will be one again. They argue that by returning all to one, there will be no more difference or distinction, and thus there will be no more suffering. Shadow of the Erd Tree does little to alter our perception of the Frenzy Flame as an evil force, but it does introduce a fascinating piece of imagery that I haven't seen people discuss much. Specifically, why does Midra look so much like Gold Mask? The image of the sunflower over Gold Mask's face almost perfectly matches the corona of fire bursting from the Lord of Frenzy's head. The answer is that the Golden Order and the Flame of Frenzy serve the same end goal. They wish to bring all under one. There is a recurring theme in Elden Ring, both metaphorical and literal, of people being brought together and split apart. This is seen as early as the first encounter with the grafted Scion, which is presumably a child of Godric. Godric and his Scions butcher creatures across the lands between, especially Tarnished, and graft their limbs onto themselves in a twisted bid for power, bringing many beings into one. The imagery behind Godric and the grafting process goes beyond just a cool dark fantasy element, though. To get into some kind of intro poli-sci, the likely inspiration for Godric in his grafted state comes from Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan. Thomas Hobbes was a philosopher who was especially concerned with the idea of the social contract and how societies formed. Having lived through the English Civil War of the 1600s, he argued that the default state of man was a state of nature, wherein people are free but unprotected. In the state of nature, anyone can do as they wish to ensure their survival, no matter how horrible, leading life to be something solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. There is no unity and no law, and all are left to seek justice and stability only as far as they can achieve these things on their own. But through a broad consent of the masses, people can cast aside some of the freedoms of a state of nature in exchange for the protection of a government through the idea of a social contract. Through the social contract, people come together as a mutual in-group, whose will, as per Hobbes, is embodied by a single absolute monarch, represented in image by a king built from the bodies of his subjects. This is the essence of state building according to Hobbes. This is how a person from New York, a person from Alabama, and a person from Hawaii can all view themselves as being part of the same group or whole. Obviously, though, it's rarely idyllic as true consent of the governed. Coercion, conquest, and even genocide are common tools used in the process of creating a mass identity. Now, getting back to video games, the horrific way that Godric brings people together is reflected in a few cultures and individuals throughout the lands between. The most obvious is Marika herself, who has merged with Radagon by the end of the game, or maybe they were always merged, through methods that are unclear. But it's also very prevalent in the DLC, where the horn-sent potentates butcher the shamans to merge their flesh with those of others in the jars as seen across the Shadowlands jails, a practice the Golden Order even continues in some sort of modified way. Even Liurnia and Raya Lucaria seem to have their own variant of this practice, with the graven seeds associated with Sellen that you also see across the game world. But while that is literally merging people together, we also see people metaphorically come together as one for common cause or contract throughout the game as well. The Round Table is the most obvious example, and just as the Golden Order came together, the Round Table holds shatters apart piece by piece as common cause and interest come undone throughout the game. This process gets mirrored again in the DLC with Miquella's faithful as well, who split into their own groups once the charm of Miquella is broken, much the same as when the Elden Ring itself was broken by Marika. Marika rules the lands between through the Golden Order, which is simultaneously a religious body, a political body, and also abstractly represents the rules of reality itself through its control over the Elden Ring, which Marika contains within herself. This puts it in line with many historical governments of our world, which rule through divine right, or the mandate of heaven, the idea that God or gods have divinely ordained the ruler of the land to be in charge. Marika's Golden Order in specific can be broadly taken as representative of many monotheistic religions of the early modern period up to our modern day, as it is defined primarily by its desire to spread across all the world and bring all under its rule and orthodoxy, and more importantly, to stamp out all that is different from itself. As Marika puts it,
in Marika's own words, the Erd Tree governs all. The choice is thine.
the Golden Order rarely accepts space for difference or dissidence. The player regularly sees evidence of other gods and cultures throughout the game, and they see many clues in the lingering evidence of old ways of life once stamped out as well. The Golden Order, through Marika and Grace, have created in-groups and out-groups. All must be brought into the fold, willingly or not. And those who either refuse to join the Order or cannot join the Order for some reason will be rejected as pariahs and heretics, either cast out to the fringes of society or killed for their failure to conform. The Golden Order is an order that cannot tolerate any other way of life. All shall be forced to conform under its rule. The Golden Order seeks to make one out of many. Of course, despite talking a big game about being everlasting and painting the Greater Will as the one true God and creator of the world, Marika and the Golden Order are as frail and temporary as anything else in the lands between. This is where Fracture comes in, as the player begins the game seeing the aftermath of the Shattering, wherein all Marika's society has come undone and the glue keeping together the many as one has gone with it. After the Shattering, the lands between have basically reverted to a state of nature, where all of Marika's children and faithful have turned on one another for their chance to become the ruling supreme, and they will do anything to make that happen. One of my favorite item descriptions in the game comes from the Spark Aromatic, which states the following: "Though fire was prohibited to those who served the Erd Tree, this rule was forgotten as the war drew ever on." The rules of the Golden Order were a means of social control. Fire was a threat to the Erd Tree and a threat to Marika's rule, so it was banned in war and combat, and prophets who saw vision of fire were similarly banished. But once the chips were down, everyone began to use it all the same. Very few people who lived under the Golden Order actually believed in or cared for its tenets. They just followed along for fear of the consequence. Once there was no more consequence, everyone went ahead and began to break its central rules. The NPCs that are name-dropped in the opening of the game broadly represent the game's main endings. Specifically, Faya, Goldmask, and the Dung Eater all present the player with mending runes that can fix the Elden Ring, but will dramatically alter the Golden Order in some way. Essentially, they are new interpretations, revisions of the Order that will rewrite the rules and re-envision the in-groups and out-groups of the lands between in a way that might allow society to heal and allow many to rejoin as one. Goldmask in particular is driven primarily by a frustration with the hypocrisy that plagued the Golden Order prior to the Shattering. Fundamentalism is a term thrown around a lot within the world of Elden Ring, and in our world it's a rather loaded theological concept that usually signifies a rigid, literalist reading of a religious text, if one assumes such an interpretation is even possible. Goldmask himself doesn't directly reference fundamentalism, he doesn't really say anything. His mask does boost incantations such as the Discus of Light, which are associated with Golden Order fundamentalists. Moreover, the Law of Regression incantation, described as one of the key fundamentals, is also required to progress his questline. And the Law of Regression is described in a very interesting way. Regression is the pole of meaning, that all things yearn eternally to converge. All shall return to the one great. The Golden Order seeks to bring all under one banner, to define all peoples and all things as belonging to itself, and to destroy anyone or anything that cannot be bent to match its definitions. Hayata describes the world as coming from one great source, a single point that the frenzy flame will return everything to. This holds true if we look to the cultures of the lands between. The Hornsent and the Golden Order, while enemies, clearly have a common culture. Both worship trees, have associations with sunflowers and the holy element, and both share the same destructive desire to dominate all the world around them, and bring all under one, something nicely illustrated with the jars in the case of the Hornsent, and the grafting as seen in the Golden Order, along with whatever is going on with Marika and Radagon in the final battle. It's obvious that these two adversaries likely originated from the same common point, and both wish to bring all back under one banner through horrific means. The Flame of Frenzy is described as chaos, supposedly the opposite of order, but in truth they both serve the same end. This is hardly subtle. The three fingers are summoned as a direct consequence of the Golden Order's own actions. The Golden Order's rigidness and refusal to understand difference created the circumstances that brought the Flame of Frenzy into the world to begin with. The Three Fingers are just as much a child of the greater will as any of the others, and it is perhaps the most pure embodiment of the Golden Order's will in the entire game. It's a twisted nightmare of order given form. It will bring all under one and eliminate all distinction and all difference. Goldmask Mending Ruin describes his vision for the world, his means of perfecting the Golden Order as such. The current imperfection of the Golden Order, or instability of ideology, can be blamed upon the fickleness of the gods no better than men. That is the fly in the ointment. To Goldmask, the issue of the Order is merely hypocrisy of the gods and perhaps demigods, who are in truth no better than humans. They shirk the rules of the Golden Order, and he finds that distasteful, but he doesn't question why this ideology was unstable to begin with, or where this hypocrisy comes from. As seen in the game, the Golden Order is a nightmarish organization that kills and destroys and maims people beneath it. The Golden Order is basically a set of rules meant to control the weak, created by the powerful. But if someone has the power to shirk its rules, why wouldn't they? The ideology of the Golden Order was never something desirable to begin with. Goldmask doesn't question the Golden Order's right to exist, he merely thinks that its rules need to be enforced with more rigor. He can't see past the Golden Order, and really he's no better than a Lord of Frenzy in the grand scheme of things. After all, isn't gold the same as yellow? The image of the sunburst that Midra and Goldmask share is also repeated in one other place, the Dung Eater. It's an odd thing for him to wear, since it probably brings to mind images of Solaire, but the Dung Eater's Sunlight Medallion places him as being just as much a faithful to the Golden Order as Goldmask. While Goldmask wishes to erase the idea of a higher caste not bound to the rules of the Order, the Dung Eater wants to bring everyone even lower through the rules of the Golden Order. He has no desire to destroy the Golden Order or its precepts, he just wants everyone to be as reviled as those on the fringes, for everyone to be locked outside of grace and forever be on the outside. The Dung Eater does not view order as a means for perfection or mercy. He sees it as a means to punish and harm, and the game probably agrees with his view. Meanwhile, Faya, who represents the third and final Mending Rune, just wants everyone to be nicer to the skeletons, I guess. The Flame of Frenzy essentially is Golden Order fundamentalism. It is the Golden Order's beliefs and behaviors taken to their most extreme possible expression. This is why Goldmask is dressed as a Lord of Frenzy, and why his ending is ultimately far from ideal. There are examples in the game of peoples coming together without violence or force, such as the Carians and the Erd Tree, but these are few and far between. The fracture and chaos that comes with the state of nature are horrific, but attempts to put things back together are often just as horrific. This leaves us with the final attempt in the game to make things right, Miquella's view of a 1,000-year voyage guided by compassion. He uses his great ruin to magically charm the disparate under a common goal, his own ascension to godhood. Though his methods are gentler than Marika's, his goal is the same. There will be no difference and no dissidence in his world. There will be a single order that rules over all others. I like to think that this is why Miquella ended up as the sole blonde of Marika and Radagon's children. Of all the demigods, he is most truly her son.